why server-side JavaScript and why we chose to use Ringo. And it just seems like a question. Honestly, I feel like you guys in general are so good with JavaScript that Ringo, for most of you, would be very easy to learn, for one thing. Especially if you've done Node. In some ways, Ringo is actually a little bit easier than Node, and I'll talk about why. But to me, probably the biggest question I could try and answer for you guys that would be helpful would be the question of why would you even bother messing with Ringo at all? Because if you decide you want to, like I say, I think most of y'all would pick it up very easily. But we will go through some code. Let's see. Oh, and I had something just fun. It just came. I was just going to mention it because some of y'all might appreciate it. And it kind of highlights the kind of guy I am. Have y'all heard of the Raspberry Pi? I finally got one. It just came. It was in my door when I was leaving the house when I left. It was just kind of. I waited for months. Are y'all familiar with the Raspberry Pi? This little.
Where do you park that?
Yeah, I waited for months. I'd actually put in like 3 orders, and finally I got one. But it's a tiny little computer, in case y'all aren't familiar, that you just hook a monitor up to, and it's like $25. But it's fairly powerful. It runs Linux, and I'm not sure if it runs Node. I haven't looked into that. But I'm hoping Ringo or Node or... Yeah, you can run... Yeah, so it should, you're saying. Yeah, it's an ARM CPU, but yeah, I mean, I like new stuff, and I'm always kind of excited about learning new things. Elsevier, by the way, has gotten, in recent years, it seems like, and I'm sure y'all would agree, fairly interesting in that way. For a while I thought they were pretty conservative, but lately we're doing cloud stuff big time, and we're doing NoSQL and server-side JavaScript, and not in every area. A lot of the company is still very Java focused, I would say, overall. And that's part of the reason too. I was trying to answer a question about why we were doing Ringo, and so for me the first bullet is something that's interesting to me to try and figure out, can I give a good argument for why we're doing what we're doing? And frankly, yeah, you guys could give me some feedback and talk with me about how you go about explaining to people, why is it a good idea to be doing this new idea of server-side JavaScript? And the last thing is I had started like an open source thing on my own that's kind of working. It's not really completely ready, but it would be fun for me to show you guys what I've been doing and get some feedback if you guys think what I'm doing is a good idea or not. And I don't know if we'll have time to get into that too much, but we'll see how it goes. First something I just found, the Lambda Lounge has a mailing group. I don't know if y'all looked at it. I think maybe I've seen it on there before. And I just noticed somebody had posted this thing that I thought was funny, and I don't know if everybody has seen this website. I thought it was really funny. All these things with Ryan Gosling. Hey girl, my mind is in an infinite loop thinking of you, 100% usage. Hey girl, roses are FF00, violets are 0FF. I use hex codes, but I'd use RGB for you. Now, I grabbed several of these, but I did have maybe a little bit of a point here, and that's simply that, like here's one about, hey girl, if non-semantic markup is wrong, I don't want to be right. Hey girl, don't worry about the bell curve, you're above and beyond SQL counts. Select average of beautiful from stunning. What struck me as I went through picking out some of these was that I was kind of intuitively asking myself, well, which of these would you guys find funny? Different ones, of course. The last one was about SQL. This is about Vim. Oh, Bill, would you pick out of this one? I know Vim is hard, but help is at hand. But what struck me was just the thought that different people would find different ones of these funny. A few of them went over my head, and I feel like I'm pretty geeky. But like here, of course, this is about, I thought love was abstract until you implemented it in my heart. Okay, so that's talking about abstract classes. So, for example, a Java programmer would probably get that one. Here's a Lisp one. You were the missing closing parentheses from the Lisp statement of my life. So let's see. By the way, I tend to write a lot, and my slides I think would do well, you know, if you were actually sitting down reading them. But sometimes I put too much text. Yeah, would you have gotten this one? Hey girl, how about an NS date? Does anybody here know what NS date is referring to? Say what?
Little foundation.
It's from Objective-C, right? Yeah.
Foundation framework.
Gotcha. Right, right. Would you get this one? Hey girl, want to join me for a cup of Java? That Ryan kid is a poser. I'm the real deal. So that's James Gosling, the creator of Java. And I bet you get this one. Y'all know who that is? Right. And well, I actually made this one up to fill in the gap. But so what's it referring to when it says that all of my parts are good ones? Right. And then I thought, had y'all seen this? I thought this was cute. Kind of pointing out that the good parts is tiny and the definitive guide is huge. So I guess, yeah, in general, I was just, like I said, thinking about the fact that I had to ask myself, well, which of those would be funny, thinking about your guys' background, and also ask myself, like, well, why did I think some were funny and some weren't? And it was just kind of pointing up the idea of programming language communities and the way it just seems natural that these communities arise around the languages. But like at our company, like I said, I mean, there's people, you know, a lot of people who still are just kind of like, you know, what is Node and why are you guys doing Node? And the other thing is that Ringo, I mean, we feel like we've had a good experience, and I can ask the other guys from my team here if they want to share some thoughts with you in a little while. But we've had a good experience with Ringo, but you know, it doesn't have hardly any community at all compared to Node. So the real question is, you know, why? And what I think, we're talking to different people, and I've also emailed the creator of Ringo. His name is Hans Wallnuffer. He's from Austria. And I asked him why he thought it hadn't gotten more popular like Node is, and he said that he felt like it partly is kind of a community thing, that technically it seems like, and I kind of agree, Ringo seems technically fine, but it almost seems like there's just maybe kind of a gap between the JavaScript community and the Java community, that for whatever reason there's not a lot of interest from Java developers, I guess, in wanting to do JavaScript. But I mean, I guess that's the big question. But I was mentioning, yeah, well, in my school days, I remember this software engineering workshop class. I don't know how common this is, where we had to actually learn like a new language every 2 weeks. And I remember I thought that was just crazy when the program began, when the class began. But by the time it was done, I thought it was a really good idea, just the idea of encouraging people to be kind of open-minded. And like I said, for whatever reason at Elsevier in the last couple of years, it feels like things have gotten a lot more open-minded. I mean, I used to be used to the idea, I'd go into my manager wanting to mention something like Mongo, and I actually gotten used to the idea that I was just going to be kind of laughed out of the room. And lately it's been like he's asking me, you know, why aren't you using Mongo? So that's really exciting to me, very different. So anyway, this is some of my too much talk stuff. So personally, I like dynamic languages. It just seems to be going back to in the 90s. When I learned Perl, I was at a company where we were doing C database reports, and this guy got hired in, and he knew Perl, and I didn't know anything about it. And all of a sudden, in like half a day, he was doing these reports that were truly taking me like 4 days. And then I learned Perl real quick. And so, even though, of course, a lot of people don't like Perl syntax, in my brain, I kind of combine, I see basically these languages as very similar, right? They all have that feeling of, you know, not compiling and just making change and quickly just testing it. And I really love that. Let's see, so this is the stuff I'm going to skip. So anyway, like I said, sometimes at Elsevier, people ask the annoying question, annoying to me, which is why. So annoying because I'm not sure I have a real good answer, but I've tried to come up with an answer, at least an attempt at one. It's kind of silly, and I did it, like I said, I like to write. I kind of did it in the style, some of you would be familiar with The Little Schemer. You ever seen the book? It's kind of a classic, I guess people feel like, where it was written in this kind of style of going to the left and right, like two people having a conversation. Unfortunately, the first slide, a little bit of Curb Your Enthusiasm might have snuck in if you guys are familiar, so there's a little bit of humor, maybe a little off-color, but we'll see. So this is kind of an embellished conversation with Tahir, who couldn't make it tonight, but so server-side JavaScript, why? I mean, server-side JavaScript, WTF, dude. Why server-side JavaScript? What do you mean, why? Why TF not? Okay. So anyway, I'm not going to say what WTF is, although I was surprised to find, I guess I'm pretty darn nerdy, because in my head I always looked up techie things on Wikipedia, and when I was getting the slides ready, I realized it really is an encyclopedia. It never quite connected with me, and I saw things that I never imagined would be in there, including pyroflatulence, which I'll let you look up if you'd like to. So anyway, yeah, so why server-side JavaScript? Because JavaScript is the new Java. Okay. So now there's an inflammatory statement. So,
yeah, I'm not sure
okay, so let's talk about it. So in what sense would... If that's inflammatory, maybe it's not right or wrong, black or white. In what sense could there be truth to the statement JavaScript is the new Java? Okay, so JavaScript was supposed to be write once, run anywhere, right? But Java applets never got popular in the browser. Java became popular on the server. I mean, this is things you all know. But nowadays, node.js is bringing JavaScript to the server. Plus, the browser is truly becoming almost an operating system all by itself, right? We're getting threads, we're getting sockets, we're getting canvas graphics, we're getting local storage in the browser. So Java was supposed to be write once, run anywhere, but it didn't make it on the browser. I mean, let's face it. I mean, there's attempts, right? Like this Java FX 2 actually looks pretty cool, but if it's going to take off, it's kind of doubtful. So yeah, if anything, nowadays really it seems like the hope for a truly write once, run anywhere language would be JavaScript. Like I say, at least this is my attempt, is that a sensible argument? Would people buy that as to be a reason that they should consider server-side JavaScript? I think it's at least a reasonable argument. I never claim that I believe what I say, by the way, but it is a reasonable argument. Anyway, back to the bathroom conversation. Okay, so you're anti-Java now. So you're switching to node.js. Well, actually, no. At least not yet. Right now, I'm using Ringo. Ringo, because JavaScript ain't the new Java, at least not yet. Flip-flopper. John Kerry reference. JavaScript is becoming a productive part of the server-side toolchain. How so? Okay, because JSON services plus JSON data stores plus JavaScript's kind of seamless working with JSON all really remove a lot of unnecessary complexity on the server-side programming stack kind of thing. Now I said JSON data stores and not NoSQL data stores, I mean whatever, NoSQL databases, just to kind of reinforce the point that it's really JSON as, your transfer formats, whatever, JSON data stores, and JavaScript. Those three things are really kind of complementing one another to get rid of a lot of complexity that costs a lot of time and money and defects. So unnecessary complexity, what kind of unnecessary complexity? Excruciating, painfully unnecessary complexity. WebSphere admin console kind of unnecessary complexity. Is that food? Well, I was I actually had a human factors background for a time. I was like a UI designer at Edward Jones for like a couple of years. I missed programming, so I went back. The only thing I can say to defend that is that Elsevier has a user-centered design department where they do usability testing. And I would argue that if they ever put WebSphere Admin Console through the usability department, we would not be using WebSphere. So that's probably the bias that's in my head, that I really just feel like they haven't done anything to try and kind of, whatever, do like the 80-20 rule to help people kind of work through what they're really trying to do. That little cartoon, I couldn't find a bigger one. I worked with Eric Burke. I bet you some of y'all know him. He's moved to California now, but this was a really cute little cartoon where he had this big stack of all these J2EE technologies on the left, and then on the right he's got this little lady with the Ruby on Rails thing walking away. It's just a really nice visual of kind of the complexity in Java J2EE that's built up over the years. So where does Ringo fit? So Ringo's a gateway drug. It's the gateway drug from Java to JavaScript. Yeah, Ringo runs on top of Rhino, and Rhino is this it's a JavaScript interpreter that runs on the JVM, and it's been around forever. Yeah.
I think, isn't Rhino the same one that CouchDB embeds to execute the JavaScript use?
I actually don't know.
Yes, I think this share, yeah, it's just another example of another project that's using the Rhino.
Oh, okay.
Oh no. Oh.
And just so I'm clear, so CouchDB is based on Erlang, correct? Isn't that what I'd heard? But it uses JavaScript, I guess, for the MapReduce kind of stuff. Anyway. So yeah, the Rhino thing's kind of interesting. I don't know if y'all are familiar, but way back a long time ago, I think it was still when it was Netscape, they were trying to build a browser that was written in Java. The project just fell apart, and the thing that kind of lived on was this Rhino JavaScript interpreter written in Java. I just think it's kind of cool. If ever you worked on a failed project, it's just kind of neat to think it was kind of like the phoenix that lived on. So yeah, and Ringo is basically adding the CommonJS module idea to Rhino. And I'm assuming most everybody here is familiar with CommonJS because of Node, but I shouldn't assume that. I mean, how many of y'all aren't familiar with CommonJS and this little thing where you do? Okay, yeah, I'll do a slide on that later. But it's actually kind of cool that it's so simple. It's just, you know, in a JavaScript file, you put a little export statement where you're just basically saying, you know, exports dot function name equal whatever, and that's how you like export the function. Where if somebody else does a require, they end up with a handle to that function. So in a strange way, it's kind of comparable to like public and private and all in a class like in Java. But it's incredibly simple. I mean, I love the fact that it's so simple. And the little open source thing that I did, well, I'll just mention about that. The little open source thing I did, I actually went ahead and did remote modules, meaning you can do the require on one machine and you've magically got a proxy for the module running on another machine. So instead of using REST, I'm actually using JSON RPC. And again, it's just real simple, and I think it's not the right answer for everything, but it's so simple that I think for some things it might be the right answer. I'm jumping, sorry. Let's see. So yeah, the thing about Rhino, just in case you're not familiar, is Rhino has really, really nice interoperation with Java, just as nice as any of the other JVM-based languages now, like Ruby and JRuby and Clojure and so forth. So it's very easy just to call into Java code from Rhino. Not quite as easy to do the reverse, but pretty easy to do the reverse, calling from Java back into JavaScript. But what I've realized over time is that's a two-sided coin, right? I mean, at first, and I still think it's great, and for our purposes, it's really helpful. But what I didn't think about at the beginning was, I mean, I kept, and some of the reasons I've come to the talks here was I was real curious about, you know, how far could we go with this CommonJS stuff? Could we actually start doing things where we're sharing code between the browser and the server? And I guess a lot of people are interested in this now. But until I started trying to do that, I didn't quite connect the dots that, oh yeah, all that cool stuff that I'm doing where I'm calling Java so easily is the very thing that makes it hard to use in the browser. So it's that catch-22 that's kind of there. But I have had some success, and that's also part of the open source thing that I'm doing on sharing code between the browser and the server. So let's see. So Java and JavaScript together in the same program, that sounds like this. So, and this is partly a reference to Vivek over there. I do have some of my teammates here. We were just chatting about Elsevier. They do use. I mean, I assume it's common everywhere now. They do use a lot of offshore outsourcing and maintenance workers and so forth, programmers. And he said, of course, they haven't been a part of our conversations as we've been adding all this Ringo stuff to our J2EE stack. And he said, when they see this, they'll probably feel kind of like this. So it's like, what the heck? You've got this hybrid architecture that you're doing. And I say, no way, dude. It's more like this. Yeah. Because, I mean, and actually, well, you'll see later, but I was kind of a believer in Groovy on Grails for a while, and I actually thought that Elsevier should consider that, and it didn't happen. In retrospect, I kind of feel like, well, maybe I'm not as smart as I think I am, because I was told at the time Groovy wasn't part of the standard, language list, that I guess these big companies have. It wasn't on the approved list. And I kind of liked Groovy, and yet at the same time, at the moment, I feel like Node and everything is really, definitely the direction that our department is headed. So if the Groovy thing had went forward, it would have been kind of a different direction. And I've actually got a little bit more on that a little later as well. But what I meant to say was Groovy on Grails really is a kind of abstraction over Spring and Hibernate, just to make it a lot more easy to work with. And in effect, what we've done with Ringo, with Spring and Hibernate, is kind of a very similar thing in a lot of ways. And I will show more on that later. So, oh yeah, I'm being mean again. This is turning into, by the way, like one of those strange European commercials, You'll see what I mean in a minute. I like my Java just the way it is. My grandpa likes COBOL. I mean, he liked COBOL. He passed away last year. Like Java's going to someday. Maybe no time soon, though. Bingo. Bingo? Ringo. So that's like that Ricola commercial, those weird European commercials? Where they, they went to the Ringo name to like ring in your head. So you'll go home tonight and you'll be like, oh, Ringo, I hear it ringing. So anyway, that's Hans Swalnoffer. Like I said, he's pretty cool because he's actually the main Rhino contributor and also the lead Ringo developer. So he is, I mean, he's truly one of these guys, like whomever, whatever, I don't know, David Hanemeyer, what's his name, Hanemeyer Smith, or he's not well known, but I feel like Hans here is that kind of a prolific guy that's doing some really cool work that he just isn't as well known, but he's like the real main guy behind this Ringo. So anyway, the main difference, I don't know how I'm doing on time, by the way, half an hour? Okay. So probably, other than the fact that Ringo is on Java, the main difference that I think people who are into Node especially would find interesting is that because of Ringo's heritage as being based on Java and based on J2EE, it just kind of naturally had threads from the beginning. I don't think anybody thought like Ryan Dahl did about threads, where Ryan says, it's taking 2 megabytes per thread and you don't scale past a certain point and all that. So the whole thing about the callbacks and the pyramid of doom, and again, a lot of guys would be more familiar than I am with this. I mean, I've read about it, but I've yet to actually work with Node, so I recognize that I'm not the right person to talk about these things. But in effect, I mean, informally, what I've heard from some of the guys at Elsevier doing Node who've also done Ringo is that they do confirm that Ringo, they feel like, does have a lower learning curve because it does have blocking I/O, And basically, you know, we are scaling to multiple requests in the way that the Java J2E stuff has always scaled to multiple requests, where it's a thread per request kind of model, and as the requests come in, they're just sent through in different threads.
Do those threads share the same? Do the threads share the same data?
Yes and no. It's funny. I mean, that's an excellent question. It was one of the questions I'd asked as well. So Ringo is all about using the common JS node system. And like, of course, when you have your variables like outside a function, but at the module scope level, in the beginning, Ringo was actually sharing those module scoped variables, if you're following me, between threads. And they changed that recently. Hans there, he's got what he calls like web workers, where he's modeled web workers and Ringo off of like the browser web worker model. And basically nowadays when you require a module like that that does have module scope variables, they're not shared by default anymore. If you want them to be shared, you actually have to use a little pattern where you actually tell it like a little factory function. So it's a little bit of extra configuration that allows you to share. But by default, by default now it's more of a shared nothing kind of model. But yeah, Rhino's had threads forever. Actually, it's got like a spawn keyword, and let's see how we doing here. So I've already mentioned this. I mean, this is actually a graph showing followers, and that Mount Everest thing on the left is Node, and like the fourth one over is Ringo. So it's not a pretty picture in terms of popularity for Ringo. I mean, it truly, like I said, if I'm honest, it's truly a question that I think everybody would and should ask themselves if they want to use Ringo. Is, you know, do you care? You know, obviously there's merit to using popular things that you know are going to be well supported and growing and everything.
But can Node call into your miles and miles of legacy Java code?
I mean, not as easily, but Michael, now you were talking about, is it node-java, the module for Node that you were using? You want to mention that a little bit? Or?
Yeah, there is a module that's available through the NPM, the Node Package Manager Registry, called node-java, which will allow you to hook Node directly to Java by instantiating classes or calling static methods. And it really works. For my company, what we decided was that it was too hard to determine whether it was robust enough. So we ended up not using it. We went a different route. But it does exist. There's some good minds working on it. They're very actively improving it. And definitely give it a shot.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Oh, that's a good segue. I forgot. Yeah, I mean, Ringo, really, you're working with Java pretty much like if you've used Bean Shell or Groovy or any of those. I mean, it's just that seamless. But I mean, there's a couple other things in the Java space. This Vertex, I don't know if you guys have heard, it's something new. I didn't really do a lot of research on it. I played with it briefly like 2 months ago and I've forgotten about it, but it's, I guess the big difference would be it's like a polyglot kind of idea that you can use any of the JVM languages and do your kind of node-ish, actor-ish kind of system with it. Unfortunately, I've forgotten the name, but there's actually another project that's kicked out that's wrapping Akka, which is the kind of answer to Erlang actor system in Java with Rhino that's independent of Ringo. I forgot the name of that. If anybody's interested, I'll find it and give me your email or something and let me know. That's very early stages, though. That one's barely, it's not really even close to ready. Yeah?
Well, I had a question regarding, I mean, this concerning Ringo, the size of the community and things like that.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the quality of the project? I mean, have you felt that the lower number of community members has hurt the quality of the project?
I don't feel like we've seen it. I mean, the other guys can weigh in. I mean, we've had a few little quirky issues that I feel like mostly have turned out to be the fact that for a while we were thinking we were running it on WebSphere, even though out of the box it's like using embedded Jetty, so it's kind of like it's really tested and everything on Jetty. And there was a few tiny quirks that we were able to get around that seemed to be those kind of differences. But otherwise, I feel like it's been pretty darn reliable. I mean, it's, yeah. And then Hans, yeah, I corresponded with Hans through email because I was worried and I actually wanted to ask him some of this before the talk. And he said, you know, he's been working on it for over 10 years. It used to be called Helma, and then it got renamed to Ringo. It's like the next generation of Helma. And he said, you know, he's working on it forever and he's committed to keep working on it forever. And like I said, I asked him his opinion about the community and why Node caught on so much, and this seemingly didn't. And he said what I mentioned earlier, that he just kind of feels like it's partly maybe just something how the Java community as a whole is kind of almost like fractured from where there's not a lot of overlap, I guess, between JavaScript people and Java people. I kind of feel like maybe that's true, because technically I can't find anything that really explains why it's not more popular. I mean, we've used it to great success so far. Yeah. Okay, so now on to our project. So it's a pretty standard, I mean standard, but truly fairly, whatever, state-of-the-art Spring Hibernate system. It's service-oriented. Elsevier is like service-oriented everything. So basically we have some JSON services coming in, ultimately feeding browsers on the left-hand side. And on the right-hand side, we're talking to other back-end services. Some of those with JSON, some with like XML, SOAP calls. And so basically, like the initial idea was largely, you know, fairly classic Spring Hibernate. I say classic, but I mean in the Java world, this is pretty much what you do. This is the popular tools that are highly touted and very popular. So kind of the thing I just wanted, in a way, an argument I wanted to make was we were using this JSON-Jackson conversion library, which is something that converts JSON to Java. And then obviously on the Oracle Hibernate side, I mean, that's your classic, whatever, object relational impedance mismatch kind of thing, right? Which Hibernate is supposed to be good at resolving. I mean, that's why it's popular. But I was making the argument here, and just to make it even clearer, that really it's kind of like three programming paradigms, if you want to call it that, going on here, in a sense. In the JavaScript world, JSON, you know, I mean, it really does stand for JavaScript Object Notation, right? I mean, JSON, in effect, is JavaScript's object model. In a way, that's what it is. Java has POJOs, and that's what Spring made popular, was the idea of using simple Java beans without all this inheritance and crazy stuff, but keeping it simple. And so that's like partly what Spring's big thing was, right? To just use POJOs as a really kind of component architecture, whatever. And then obviously RDBMS on the right-hand side. So yeah, I already said that. But I guess, you know, object relational mismatch, that's a common, you know, buzzword that people talk about, like converting POJOs to relational. So this on the left, this is like me making up stuff saying JSON Java impedance mismatch. And so the question is, am I overstating things to try and call it that? So here's kind of more or less a sample of like what our Java code looked like for building some JSON errors to return through these services. So in this stuff, yeah, you got like a map from string to object. That's kind of how JSON was looking, at least in our code. There's another way to do it, and I show that later. But basically, yeah, that's kind of what Java looked like for expressing some fairly simple JSON. Now I was like here, what I did, here I'll go back. So see, there's constants being used for like the keys for the JSON, and here I switched it to strings, which of course making it strings actually makes it clear when I go to the next slide. Okay, so here's what we had in Ringo after we made the switch and started using Ringo more. So here you actually see the JSON exactly as it's going to be returned. And I'm kind of jumping around, sorry, but my point here was this is truly what our code looked like, and this is truly, you know, in my background, and I think a lot of people's backgrounds, we were trained to do as Java programmers, was that we were good at, you know, doing these constants for these things is a good thing. But of course, because I've done Perl, my attitude was, no, I think this is a good thing because we can actually see better what's going on. But at the end of the day, this really is this. I mean, only in the JavaScript version do you see one-for-one what the JSON service little wiki specification things we do shows is going to be returned with what the code actually looks like and what testing with the browser actually shows. So I mean, it gets rid of just a hell of a lot of stuff that can cause you bugs just because you're not seeing what you're trying to do. This is just another, I was just trying to be fair here to Java. This is another Java way of doing it where you're using this JSON object type and JSON array type. And in this case, the JSON that would result is at the lower right. So I'm trying to be fair here and saying now is, you know, you can make your own judgment. Is that better or not? And then here I was going to mention Groovy again, because I was a fan of Groovy, and I still think Groovy has some amazing features, but here's something that just came out with Groovy about a year ago when they were kind of bragging that they'd added some JSON builder features. And so this is what it looks like in Groovy nowadays to build JSON that really is meant to ultimately come out this way. And if I switch back and forth again, I mean, you'll see that even in Groovy, Groovy has these really cool meta programming features where you can like replumb, you know, method missing. I don't know if you all are familiar. I mean, you can do some amazing things. But at the end of the day, this is actually using Groovy's grammar for the syntax, and there's limits to what they can do with these DSL fancy features. Because what you're seeing there when you see like name Colorado is really it's really a method call with an argument of Colorado, where they provide these optional parentheses is what they've done. In Groovy, like everything's optional almost, parentheses and semicolons and everything. And that becomes, between that and this method missing becomes a way that you can kind of hijack and do interesting things like what you're seeing here. But at the end of the day, I still, you know, personally prefer just JavaScript because it's just one-for-one. You're not trying to convert between two different syntaxes. So for our next generation project, I mean, my understanding, and y'all can tell me if I'm wrong, the diagram gets even simpler. We're looking forward that hopefully it's just kind of, because you're using like a NoSQL data store that stores JSON, there's even less to worry about, which is kind of my point in saying that we go basically down to 2 boxes instead of 3. But at least for our project, that really wasn't an option because we were working with legacy code and legacy tables, and we didn't have time to rewrite the entire system. But what we kind of wound up with, and we really did kind of the agile thing of, you know, kind of learning over time. Was Ringo good enough to do what we wanted? And we had new stories, and we did more with it. And I feel like over time, our system kind of evolved into the system that's making fairly heavy use of Ringo. And so in effect, Ringo, well, replaces that JSON-Jackson conversion stuff for one thing, but it almost just becomes kind of the controller layer. And I should clarify that, again, because of timelines, this is a little bit of an ideal diagram. It's not this way for everything in our system, but for the stories that were new and for parts of our system, it is this way. Or in some cases, we're actually bypassing like Spring and Hibernate and just directly going through the Ringo, creating these JSON service calls to the back end. We're using E4X. I don't know if y'all are familiar. You know, Mozilla actually pushed some new features. You know, Mozilla, they actually kind of like released some new JavaScript features in Rhino and in SpiderMonkey, right? That some of the other JavaScript versions don't quite have. You know, Brendan Eich works for Mozilla, so I guess that's part of the reason that's happening. E4X, at least for a while, was thought to be one of those up-and-coming features. Nowadays, it appears it's not going to be the case, but for us, it actually worked well. And E4X is this thing where right inside of JavaScript, you're using XML natively. It's not in quotes, it's not a string. It's actually native XML right there in your JavaScript file, and you can do very simple kind of creation of XML. So we actually hit SOAP endpoints RESTfully and get back the XML and work with it right there in JavaScript and never deal with anything else for those. And then of course the JSON side is very simple. Oh, okay, so I can shut up now. because now we can look at some code. Let's see. Here, okay. You guys want to add anything, by the way, else of you guys? Anybody? Yep. Okay, jump in if you do, I don't mind. Let's see here. Okay, whoops. So it installs as just a simple zip file, by the way. There's not even an installer. You just unzip it and set like Ringo home to point to that directory and add Ringo home / bin to your path. So it's pretty typical. But yeah, I'll just start by making like a little hello world program. Let's see, I did it earlier, so let me get rid of the one that's there. Whoops. Well, I guess that's fine. So yeah, I mean, I guess it's fairly standard these days. So there's a Ringo admin that's kind of like npm or whatever for Node, and you could just say like create hello world. So it's going to pull in some files, you know. I guess it's, you know, I feel like Ruby on Rails started all this, right? It's kind of like the scaffolding idea. I mean, Ringo's maybe isn't quite as elaborate. It doesn't, Ringo isn't like inherently model view controller. It's kind of, it's very simple. Now the guys, we've got Justin Joseph here. He works with some offshore guys, and we're doing a project separate from the one that I just showed the diagrams for. It's the second project that we've used Ringo on, and that one we're just using it all by itself without Spring and Hibernate. And for that we've used more the way I'm showing here. And his team, they liked kind of model view controller, and so they actually just kind of organized their files and directories in more of a classic, you know, controller directory, views directory kind of thing, which is fine. You know, Ringo doesn't really care. So having created that hello world thing, we can just say Ringo main.js, and should be able to at least see the little starting point kind of an app. So you're supposed to applaud now. Well, now I feel bad. That was a lot of applause. Clearly that was sarcastic applause. So there is like a little debugger that's built in. Now again, this is a, you know, Java-based system here. The debugger is actually, clearly it's like written in Swing or something. For those of you that know Java, you'll kind of recognize that as soon as it pops up. It's not necessarily the most beautiful debugger in the world, but it's functional and we use it all the time. By the way, I don't know how to make the font bigger on this debugger, so I'm just going to do this, whatever you call it, like for the handicapped people kind of thing. Zoom in this way. Yeah, I don't know how to make the font bigger on this debugger. But yeah, I mean, it's got the fairly standard stuff you'd expect. You've got breakpoints and step into, step over. You've got a little, down here you can see your local variables here at the bottom. It's effective. We use it all the time. like your require statements like we were talking about for CommonJS. You know, this is like your standard pattern. You see it everywhere. Let's see. I was going to show y'all just a little bit of a more elaborate program. I just threw MySQL on here. I've got another example later using Mongo, but I guess for whatever it's worth, yeah, I just kind of felt like maybe Ringo would have a home in these enterprises that are, you know, maybe a little more conservative, that are already using Java. And
does Rhino already have destructuring stuff in it?
Yeah, that was one of the things, like I mentioned, that because Rhino is from Mozilla, it seems it does have a number of features that are a little bit interesting like that. Method missing it has.
Because I saw you had use destructuring with wrapping the square
right, yeah. Yeah, they have that. They have method missing, which is kind of cool, you know, for like...
Actually, you can have that V8 as well, because they have proxies.
Oh, okay.
That's implemented through proxies.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm drawing a blank. I mean, there's several things that are in there that are kind of different. I mean, I guess E4X would be another thing that's different. List comprehension, this is one of the things they have. Continuations like the yield kind of statement, that's in Rhino. That's actually kind of interesting. I played with the continuations and I was able to do the thing. Are you familiar? Like, a lot of times people will explain continuations by saying, you know, like if you play video games, you're used to being able to pause a video game and resume it later. They make the analogy that a serializable continuation can let you do that kind of thing, and just you're saving your whole stack, your stack, and you can just start it later. Well, with Rhino you can do that, and it's kind of odd, but I found it interesting just because that idea is the basis of an old idea that never caught on called mobile agents. The idea you could have code running and you'd hit a like migrate statement, and all of a sudden your program jumps from this machine to the other machine. This was this idea of like mobile agents. There was a company called Magic Cap or something, Telescript, years ago that never caught on. But it's an interesting idea, and I feel like that's an idea that illustrates something that having JavaScript everywhere lets you at least think about, that having different languages in different places really just doesn't really afford those kind of ideas. Things like node.js or Jaxer. Jaxer, did y'all ever hear of Jaxer? It was kind of an interesting thing where they were taking Firefox and basically just taking the guts of it and putting it on the server, so it was able to like render pages on the server and do things where you were able to just say, like in your page, you know, run at server or run at client. So it looked like a simple page was actually behind the scenes kind of split between the server and the client. And that's actually kind of one of the inspiration for one of my open source open source project that I mentioned. I'm doing the same kind of thing in that.
Does Ringo have full continuations or just shallow ones?
I'm not sure I know the difference. What's the difference?
Full continuation actually does capture the entire stack, and not the shallow continuations like that are proposed for the ECMAScript spec. Just are like one frame continuations. Like they don't capture the entire stack, so you can't just like jump back to and have the entire state read. So usually you just have like a generator function that is with the yield.
I could be wrong, but I think they're the full continuation kind. But the other thing about Rhinos is it's kind of weird. It only runs if you're running in this interpreted mode. Rhino does have a mode where it's really like compiling to Java bytecode, class file stuff behind it. But if you give this different command line option that's running in interpreted mode, and my understanding was in that interpreted mode, it's comparable to like stackless Python. Did you ever hear of that? Where a language like that, it actually doesn't have a traditional stack, and I don't fully understand that. But the fact that it's this stackless kind of interpretation combined with Java serialization, it's actually using the fact that it's written on top of Java to be able to save all of this stuff using Java serialization in a kind of simple way, apparently. But I don't know. That's, I guess, too geeky.
Does Ringo have a package for like on-the-fly interpretation of CoffeeScript?
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's fairly new. But they put in a feature where you can like easily plug in that if a file has a certain extension, you can like plug in your own little require handler. It's a pluggable require, he called it. Yeah, and somebody's built, like another person has built something that does the CoffeeScript stuff on the fly. Yeah, that's fairly new actually. Yeah. Let's see. I could show you my MySQL example, but actually let me just jump quickly to the Ringo website, because I think there's some quick stuff that you might find interesting there. So the website is just ringojs.org, and like here on their front page, if you're familiar with Node, it's kind of obvious here that I think he's kind of imitating Node or trying to kind of answer Node, because on the Node homepage they always show like a simple HTTP server to kind of say, look how easy it is to do an HTTP server, and this is Ringo's equivalent. I actually have that here. So here's Node's homepage, and they're showing like the HTTP server. In Node, you always have like request and response here. That's a slight difference. In Ringo, you just have request, and you're returning the response. But I mean, all in all, like I said, if you're handling Node, I mean, you would handle Ringo no problem. I think this is an example where he's trying to kind of highlight, now here's something you can do in Ringo that you couldn't do in Node, and that would be, you know, here he's doing a little swing app using Ringo. And this is how you actually, oh, there's your destructuring assignment you were talking about. But yeah, here, this is truly how he's using a swing package, the JavaX.swing package, and creating, I mean, actual Java objects right here in JavaScript. And we've done a lot of this too. I mean, it's kind of funny, you know, I always recognized that JavaScript syntax was similar to Java, but I never really gave it much thought. But we actually are benefiting from the similarity. There's times where I've taken, you know, a servlet filter that was in Java, and I sit down, and in an hour I've converted it to JavaScript, and it's at most an hour. And it's just funny, like I say, I mean, actually, it's really only been in the last year and a half or so that I've really, you know, deeply been getting into JavaScript, and so I started watching like Brendan Eich's talks about the history of JavaScript and stuff, and it was kind of interesting that, yeah, I mean, he explains that was kind of what happened, you know, that it wasn't originally all JavaScript syntax, but then because of this business agreement it got kind of changed and was meant to be kind of Java's little brother, and that even the idea was that, yeah, JavaScript would be kind of this glue language to use Java components to kind of orchestrate in JavaScript. And it's just kind of funny, it seems like the idea never really caught on, but that is in effect the way we're using it for what we're doing. Let's see, if you go, I mean, yeah, if you want to try it, like I said, it's an easy install. You can download download the zip right here. You unzip it and set your Ringo home. The documentation in some areas is a little out of date. Like I say, they don't have a lot of help. So there's a tutorial on here that's like written for the 0.7 version that actually is out of date with the 0.8 version. It's unfortunate, but it doesn't seem like a huge stumbling block. It's pretty easy just to look at the code, like that scaffolding that you get, and understand what's going on. Here's a couple screencasts. This one was about deploying to the Google App Engine, a little example. We're using Amazon EC2 a lot at Elsevier, by the way. It just seems to be the way Elsevier is going, I guess just because of how flexible it is. You know, it's just almost just like a virtual Unix hosting service. You can put anything on it you want to. So Google App Engine, you know, doesn't seem to be that open that way. So here you can see on this API master page, these are like a bunch of the provided modules. Let's see, there's quite a few. Like I say, Helma was a 10-year-old, I mean, it's been around a long time, and then it got renamed to Ringo, so there's actually just a lot of stuff for, technically the fact that Ringo is only like 2 years old, but really, yeah, it's really a renaming of this older project. So there's a lot of stuff here, Mustache. There's your parser where you can do, you know, actual parsing and get your AST and do things. There's like JS doc support where you can do your, you know, Java docs kind of documentation. Let's see, here's like this web worker thing that he's got going. Trying to just highlight a few. Let's see, all this stuff is meant to be the common JS standard, you know, and for whatever reason, it seemed like a lot of those common JS standards, I mean, at least some of them were like the blocking I/O kind of idea, like at least the file system stuff. And but yeah, Ringo is trying to be very much conformant to those standards, whereas my understanding is Node is playing a little loose with some of the standards, if I understand things correctly. Sorry, I'm trying to remember what else did I want to highlight here. I was just thinking something and I lost it. What was I thinking? I guess the packages. So, that Ringo admin command that I mentioned, you can also do Ringo admin install, and it'll pull these packages down through GitHub. So again, it just looks like it's almost like imitating, copying, stealing, I don't know what you want to call it, the NPM package manager. It works very much the same. It's actually still the same package format, package.json, and there are Node stuff that I've used. On occasion, I have to like tweak the package.json file. And obviously I've only been able to do it if it's like a pure JavaScript package and not something that's using like C libraries and stuff. And like I said earlier, Ringo's has the reverse problem, that with Ringo packages sometimes it'll be like a jar directory with Java jar files. And so obviously that keeps you from using it anywhere but Ringo basically. But yeah, here's some ones that are kind of interesting. CommentD. We've got Hibernate, we've got Mongo, Cassandra, Redis, SQLite, OAuth is one we're needing to use that I keep needing to learn more about. So obviously, I mean, NPM, what is it, the NPM registry thing, I mean, when I searched on there, I was like, oh my gosh, it's amazing how much stuff there is on there. So, I mean, I was kind of happy with this, you know, I mean, for me, there was like some pretty cool stuff to play with here, but obviously compared to Node, this is like a drop in the bucket. But, I don't know, like I said, so far it's been effective for us, so that's about all I can say about that. So I kind of think maybe I should just hold off on the other little segment on my open source thing.
Do you want to at least point us to it and give a couple, just a real quick overview of what it is?
Okay, sure. Let me go back to my slides. Okay, well maybe I should ask you the name. Ethereal, I googled on the name. I don't think anybody else is using it yet. You're laughing, it's not a good name?
No, it's great.
I don't know, you're laughing.
I've done that too. You know, try to make sure a name you're picking is
oh, okay.
Are you building a network packet analyzer in JavaScript? Because that's what I get out of Ethereal.js.
Well, that was the one, yeah, that was the one name I did. Yeah, that was the one thing I did come across with that name.
That's a pretty big thing.
And it's very popular. Okay, well, I'll think about the name then. Maybe it needs to change. I did see that online. I'd never used it. I didn't know if that was super popular. So, okay, I'll try and breeze through these real quick because I've got a little bit of a kind of elevator pitched explanation of how I was thinking about what I was doing. So last year, and you know, like here's something from InfoQ from last year that I connect with because, you know, Elsevier went, you know, from SOAP to REST, and nowadays we don't, I mean, everything we're doing now is REST, basically. And then I started hearing about Node and WebSockets and everything, and started thinking, well, now, wait a minute, are we going to have another shift here? You know, it opens up so many possibilities. So here's an article here on InfoQ from this year where people were expressing similar thoughts that I was having in my head about about the fact that REST, it's better than SOAP, but in some cases, to me, you know, it just takes more thought. I mean, you actually, you know, I read like that O'Reilly book, I don't know if you guys did, where, you know, you're supposed to structure your URLs a certain way and you know, use the verbs appropriately. And I mean, it's not hard to do, but it's just interesting that WebSockets open up new possibilities, and I was struck by this one guy's comment here, because it's what I was thinking. It's like, looking out a year or two, will we be saying to one another, okay, are we going to use REST, or are we going to do something else with WebSockets? Because now we have the ability to, we didn't before. So Ethereal's kind of experiment to answer the question about the fate of REST with an answer that's consistent with the lack of hair in my head. And yes, so remote procedure calls. That's basically, I'm using JSON RPC kind of with extra cheese, whatever, because basically I use JSON RPC, but I stick like the module in with the name of the method to be called. So, and of course, yeah, remote procedure calls, I mean, I used Corba, whatever, over 10 years ago, and Corba kind of, I don't know, felt like it kind of had a bad name. There was just performance issues and different things. But I'm actually, let's see, sorry, I'm reading what I wrote, what do I want to say? I don't want to drag this out too long. Yeah, so like I said, to me, RPCs have the advantage of being dead simple to understand, and there might not be the right answer for every situation, but for some cases, if you're able to use JavaScript like on both sides, yeah, I mean, this was a thought that occurred to me one day that I think is true. Yeah, RPCs are so simple, if they weren't invented, they would be invented tomorrow. I mean, they're just obvious. So the main idea in Ethereal would just be to do this idea of like remote modules. So what I did was this is on Ringo, by the way. I like monkey patched the require statement so that if you had some configuration behind the scenes, saying a certain module ran on a different machine, on the fly, I build like a proxy. So the client, I mean, it's a little bit like Corba used to be, if y'all are familiar with Corba. So on the client side of things, you're getting a proxy that you're calling, and it's actually calling through a WebSocket to the other side, and making it feel like it's local. So Corba had like this notion of like location transparency, which was this idea that you should be able to take code and have it basically look the same if it's local or if it's doing these remote calls. Obviously, the interesting thing there that a lot of you guys would relate to is that when you think about it, function calls are synchronous. That's their nature, right? I mean, yeah, you call a function, it does its thing, and it returns. So when you're doing that over the network, network latencies are a problem. I mean, that's the whole blocking asynchronous thing like Node focuses on. So basically, I actually was doing a little more in my stuff with synchronous calls, but otherwise I was just using promises. So I just, in these proxies that I built, I actually give you the option of calling the function just as if it were local, in which case it is a synchronous call, or putting like .async between the function name and the opening frame of the arguments to switch it into something that would return a promise. So it's not really completely location transparent, but it's a very small, I mean, at least it's a smaller change to make something do this remote module kind of idea than otherwise. And then I'm almost done, by the way. The last thing I'll just mention is I am doing some stuff now with like the browser and the server sharing code. Hans, the Ringo guy, he had created this Ringo modular based on modular. Has anybody heard of modular? It's one of the packages out there for doing the stuff where it packages up your server-side modules with wrappers, where you call that a like module pattern or something, right? The idea you're putting a little function around the module that in the common JS world doesn't have any wrapper, and that little function takes as arguments like the actual exports object. And so basically what modular did was it did that with a whole bunch of, the whole dependency tree of all these require statements calling out to everybody else, and creates like one big package that has all these wrap things that get sent to the browser. So I took that Ringo modular and I extended it so it would also do this proxying that I'm talking about, so that the browser ends up getting a big package that can actually talk to the server depending on your configuration for certain modules. So the interesting idea that I haven't quite settled yet was just, the idea was just on the server, your module path, you know, Ringo and I assume Node 2 has a module path where it's finding these modules through a path. And the idea would just be to have different module paths depending on who your client was, so you could in effect create these different bundles that are sent to the browser and then would be sent to another Ringo client, or maybe in the future even a Node client. And that was, I mean, I'm hoping maybe I'll be able to rewrite what I've done where you could actually do this kind of thing, where you could have Node talking to Ringo, talking to a browser. I mean, at least that's the vision, is to have JavaScript everywhere and to almost be like an actor system with all these Java modules talking to each other. Yeah?
I have a couple of projects that I can show you that have a similar idea in mind.
Oh, okay. Something that you're doing or working on? Or
something I've been using.
Something you've been using?
But it has ports to a couple of other languages, so you can actually have servers running different languages that all talk to each other using the same interface.
Cool. So this is something you've written or something you're using? You're using? Does it have a name? Or?
It's Dnode.
Dnode, yeah. I've seen Dnode. I looked at it a little bit.
But it has ports and Perl and Ruby as well. So you can have a Perl and Ruby server and be able to like use the same kind of style. So the other end doesn't necessarily have to know what the other servers are written in. They just act the same way. The client.
Right. I did look at it a little bit. I thought it looked pretty cool. In the way with Dnode, you can even send kind of like a callback function where you're calling the server and then he calls you back, right?
Like a whole bunch of functions across, and it serializes those, basically replacing them with like markers, like with an ID, so a unique identifier. So that way, that on the other side, it could be like, hey, we want to call this unique identifier with these parameters, and sends the parameters back and runs that code on the other side, runs that function on the other side.
Right.
And so you can actually have it. Them keep passing back and forth functions, so you can have like if you wanted to have like a handshake and some kind of negotiation, or like you have like 3 different callbacks back and forth. You can do that kind of thing really simply.
Yeah, I had looked at it. My impression was it wasn't doing exactly what I was doing, in the sense that I was truly trying to make it kind of like where you just felt like you were just directly calling this function that looks like it's local. My impression was Dnode, it kind of does have a little API kind of thing where you kind of have to tailor your...
You don't have to pass it a callback, but it was just kind of a thing. But the main reason that I particularly like that style better is that it is across the network, so you need to know that something's going to take time to give you a response back. So either giving a promise or passing a callback to it is something that's necessary to distinguish it from something that's actually is running local. So there's like a Java remote method application that uses like the same kind of thing, where you have a local object that you have and you run methods on that, but then it goes across the server and wherever that object is. Like you're supposed to run that, and that gives you that thing back, but it blocks that whole thing. But it looks exactly like a regular function or method call. And so you might be doing something that looks like it's going to be really quick, but it takes a long time.
Cool. I'll look into that a little more. That's neat. Yeah.
Is your project out on GitHub or another
No, I mean, I was truly working on it like last week, trying to have it to the point where it would be demoable. So yeah, it's really not even quite to that point, but it's pretty close.
We'll look forward to it.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, yeah, we'll call it then.
Are you sure?
I mean, I could show some of the code, but I think it's probably time to quit.
Does anybody have any questions for Darren? I had one.
Sure.
So I thought it was really interesting how you showed how the source code had transformed to where it looked more like the JSON. You know, I mean, you kept getting closer and closer to that representation as you introduced more Ringo into the stack. How do you feel that affected your mental model? In other words, yeah, it makes it so when you're looking at the source, it's apparent, but maybe you're a veteran developer, so do you feel it really had that much of an impact on you or other members of your team who are already comfortable with the old school Java style I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, in other words, did it affect your mental model as well as affecting the shape of the source code?
I love that question because I wanted to pull these guys in more and I feel bad that I didn't. I think that's a great question for you guys. Did you guys feel like switching?
There was resistance in the beginning when we did it.
Yeah, like switching the gear, like our whole project, like for the last 4 years, is completely it was in Java, and JavaScript we were just using for the client side. And suddenly having that big change, where we have to find, okay, all of the developers they are having like comfortable, like how comfortable are they? Like you cannot say that, okay, I like this, okay, you do this. So we just did an analysis, then just took a vote, and then obviously came to the thought, okay, we can go with it. So it was new, good for learning. There are a lot of advantages that Darren could not like, since there was a little time, he did not tell what like user pushed us, like okay, we have to use Ringo. There was some other motivation, like we wanted something is really flexible for deployment, and we wanted to remove a lot of processes, like you know that in Java, if you have to push your code in production, if something went wrong, you need a big release, you want to remove all that. So some of that will give you advantage, like okay, if you feel okay something is wrong, you really want to fix it quickly, you don't have to go with the big cycle. So these were the motivation, and of course, like we wanted to learn the good thing.
Yeah, I actually, personally, I felt kind of like, I mean, when we would do our code reviews, I would feel the way I said on my slide, that I would feel like, well, we're reviewing that code, and I'm seeing all these constants, and I know our goal is to have the JSON output, and I'm not sure if the code's right or not, I would just feel a little bit lost. So for me, I felt like the JavaScript helped with the JSON stuff in particular, yeah.
Initially, it was like a little strange, okay, how it would behave and all that, but now, like, we're spending like almost a year, or I mean, it's very comfortable. We are very comfortable with this project. Yeah, it's good in fact. How we want to be.
It's funny, just briefly, that the change control deployment kind of stuff you mentioned. I mean, I assume it's in all these companies where, you know, yeah, we have these groups that are all about change control and controlling our releases, and if you make any change at all to the system, it's got to go through this real high ceremony kind of thing. But we had a loophole that for a long time they've, you know, had, you know, like kind of like a content management system, the idea that you can deploy content without a code release. And so there was things in place for deploying HTML and CSS and JavaScript as part of it. Yeah, you can touch it on to me here, yeah. So they didn't quite catch their loophole there that they're not saying if it's server-side JavaScript or browser-side JavaScript. So we're sliding into that. When you say that's kind of, but I mean it's terribly helpful because yeah,
for us these are just static contents.
Right.
Just static contents, nothing more than that.
Right. It was the best way to, because we had to do a fulfillment model for any new fulfiller without a